Hey Roosters, and welcome back to another episode of Make My Own TCG. Today's episode, we finally get right into playtesting the game. The game that we've been talking about for about a month now. Now we've been coming up with ideas and concepts for, we finally get to bring to the table, or the digital table in this case, and see how it works out. But if you guys have ever playtested a card game, you kind of know how it sort of goes, especially with the very first playtesting session. I did play a couple of games, not just one, but it doesn't really matter. When you're first testing out a game, if you ever have tested out a game, please comment down below, whether it be a game that you were creating or helping a friend with. You know that things can get kind of hectic in early playtesting stages. But there are quite few examples and surprises of great things that can come out of the early playtesting experience, and that's what I'm really probably going to be talking about in today's video. You see, I recorded a whole video of me playing the card game, and I played it with a friend, and guess what? It was extremely boring. When you're playing a game this early on, first of all, it's not exciting. Everything's not really fine-tuned and laid out perfectly, and it makes battles while playing the game kind of boring to watch. And I figured I'd better do something a little more to spice up the gameplay. Especially because this is early playtesting, I don't really feel the need to show you guys it anyway, and so I decided to do something a little more abstract. I'm going to talk about playtesting in general, card games. I've done quite a bit of it throughout my time making card games, and yeah, it's usually where I end up scrapping card games. I mean, playtesting is where you realize that all your ideas you came up with, no matter how good you thought they were, you find out whether or not they're fun to actually use in practice. And so, in today's video, I'm going to talk about that experience, but I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons of my card game, because you know what? In the very first video, the very first episode of this series, I promised myself that I wasn't going to give up on this card game. I was going to bring it to a playable version of it until I move on to something else. And so I'm not going to give up now, even if I do have a little bit of gripes with the game, whether that be from the base design aspects or from simple mistakes made in card development. I'm going to talk about the variety of the things that I thought was great about the game. I'm going to talk about the things that may have irked me just a little bit more than I'm really happy to admit. But through it all, I hope you guys are ready to enjoy and learn a little something about how playtesting goes and sort of the pains that can come with it. As I said, I originally recorded a video for you guys to just watch and just enjoy the gameplay, and I really found out that that was unenjoyable. It was kind of boring to watch it, especially at this early playtesting level. And then I decided that maybe I should do a play-by-play, you know, look at it and just speak over, cut out the original sound and stuff like that. And that sort of ran into the same problem, boredom. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk about the pros, the cons, and sort of the different ways I can move forward with the card game based off this first playtesting session. I'm probably going to end up putting the video still on screen for you guys to just watch as I talk, because it's a lot better than still images, but at the same time, I'm not really going to go too in-depth about exact things that happened within the playtesting session. So let's set the stage for this playtesting experience. First off, what did I do to playtest the game? So I made some cards, I made up some draft cards, no images, nothing really graphically amazing, but at the same time something that we could work with, and it had all the elements you need to play the card game, and that was what's important. I uploaded those cards to Untap, and I was ready to start playing with a friend. I didn't really create too many cards, about only a couple, and I kind of duplicated them so we could have bigger decks, but the point was to just see how the mechanics worked. I wasn't really trying to fine-tune anything in particular. Later in playtesting, I'm going to get certain cards that I want to balance out, make sure they're not too powerful, too weak, after all the concepts are already down-packed. But right now, I was sort of just feeling out the actual mechanics of the game and deciding what might be needed to be changed before we move on to further hours of playtesting. And so, yeah, admittedly, it wasn't as amazing, glorious as it could have been, but I think there were some really important things that I got out of it. Without wasting any more time, let's get right into the gameplay. Or rather, let's get right into talking about the gameplay. Let's start with the cons. That way we can end the video talk about the pros, and that can make the video really hopeful and optimistic going forward and moving forward with this card game. So what are some of the cons about the card game that I didn't like? Some mechanics that I introduced into the game that sort of irked me the wrong way. Some things that I wish I had done a little bit differently. The first one is going to be the board system. In this game, there's going to be a board that you've traversed, and it's sort of like an overworld. And when you encounter another player, you enter into a combat simulation in which you fight until one player dies, and only then do you return to the overworld to continue traversing the board. The thing about this all, though, was that the board kind of felt like it was only adding to slow down the game. It's a concept that I came up with not even originally when I was coming up with the concept of this game, but something I came up along the way, and it's only hindering, in my personal opinion, from playtesting those couple of games, it's only hindering the fun of the game. It's slowing it down, it's making it more gritty. I mean, it's not a bad idea, and I'm still in love with the concept, but I think I need to workshop how it's going to be done a little longer. Not to say that I'm going to get rid of it, but it can be easily done so. I wanted it to be a unique mechanic that other games didn't have, a unique take on using a board within a card game, and I'm starting to wonder if it's even needed here to really add anything to the game. Another mechanic that I didn't really like was going to be the action and the side action mechanic, the main action side action mechanic that I got from Ashes Reborn. And Ashes Reborn does it great. That's because they put a break. And I said this when I was talking about this concept in the previous video. I said that a lot of games that have this mechanic, they usually end up putting a break within the game. And that is to refresh the player's resources. And I'm starting to find out that maybe there's also an alternative reason for why people would do that. People may simply not just want to refresh your resources, but that sort of break in the mundane action of the game, the action, side action, it's refreshing. Maybe it's because I played a lot of card games that do that. Maybe because in card games you're accustomed to, okay, I start my turn, I draw, I do this, and then it's your turn, and you get to do your things. And sort of that rhythm to a card game that most people already expect to be there. Maybe that's what's adding this feeling to the game, but this not being there at all. If you want to draw a card, it's up to you to spend your main or side action to do so. If you want to play a card, it's up to you to do your main or side action to do so, and once you've run out of main and side actions, once you've done both, or either, or neither, it's over to your opponent's turn. And it's not so simple to say, I pass. When you pass, you lose that action, and you don't get it back. And the thing about that is that there is no break in which you can say, okay, I pass, you pass, okay, I'm ready to draw cards. No. If I pass, it's just gone, and he gets to go, and then I have to go again, or else I pass, and then he can beat on me for infinite amounts of time before I lose the game. Like the board mechanic, I think that there's something more I can be doing with this mechanic within the card game. I think I can add more to it to make it a lot better, but at the same time, I do understand that I'm not sure if it's needed for the game to work. I'm sure I can do a more basic and more natural, a more understandable, a more non-unique turn structure, not so pretentious, that could make the game a whole lot better and a whole lot more fun to play. But just like the board mechanic, I'm not ready to give up on this mechanic just yet. I'm ready to see how I can mold it into making it something better for the card game rather than something worse for it. Other than that, what else did I like about the card game? And it's going to be sort of the light and dark system, the energy system, the balance system, and I don't mean the system in of itself, but rather how I implemented it in this early card game playtesting. I realized that the difference between the two didn't mean much. As much as I was sort of balancing these two resources while playing the game, I found out that the difference between the two resources didn't really exist. It didn't matter which one I spent, and it didn't matter which one I expended, as long as the two numbers were the same. And that's sort of what I wanted for the game, but there's some other things that I wanted for the game, especially regarding this light and dark system that wasn't really present. And I'm going to have to find a way to make it more so. That's more of the design of the card aspects and the design of the game itself, but I think that if this mechanic is going to stay, it needs to be more present. Sometimes I started to forget that it even existed in the way that I wanted it to. All of these problems that I have with the card game is maybe rooted in the fact that I'm trying to make it a little too unique, quote unquote. I want it to be too different from other card games, and so it's making it just worse. Sometimes I start to wonder, especially when I was playing the final playtesting version, should I just go and use what already worked in the past? Why try to fix something that isn't obviously broken? And it's definitely something to think about. It's something to sleep on, because it's an important idea to keep in mind when designing the rest of the card game. Should I always try to make it different from other card games, or should I sometimes understand that there are important and cool and fun aspects of other card games that simply can be used here instead? But now that I ejected all the negative energy out of me, and now that I can completely void of that depressing sort of ideas, sort of the downer parts of the card game, let's talk about the things that get me excited. The highlights of the game for me, and then actually I think there's more highlights of this game than there are bad points, which I think is that's a plus. I mean, that's a win the way I see it. Win's a win, right? So what is the biggest highlight of the game for me? Something that I actually didn't even think I was going to like so much when I was designing it, but I ended up doing, and I really think that's a pro for the game, especially because it's such a core mechanic of every card game, and that's going to be the combat system. How combat works, attacking and defending, became a huge plus for me that I didn't really see coming, right? So how does attacking and defending work in this game? Well, there's 4 zones, right? There's 4 attack zones, and every attack card targets one of those zones. And as a defending player, you have to defend that zone with a defense card from your hand, right? But the thing is that cards, any singular card can have attack zones that it can attack and defense zones that it can defend, which means that most cards can be used for both attacking and defending, not one or the other, but there's more to it than that. Every card shares one power value that determines how much it defends or attacks for, and which means that most cards will end up being attacking and defending for a similar amount. But there's more to the combat system, because the thing is that you have boosting mechanics. And boosting says that basically if you spend a light or a dark energy, you can gain this much more attack or this much more defense. And so what it ends up meaning that every card has something it's good at doing, but every card can almost do everything, right? So in no situation did I ever feel like I couldn't block an attack that was coming towards me. But at the same time, there was sort of many situations when there was better cards that I wish I could have used that I couldn't use. And maybe that sounds like it would be a con, but it actually became a pro for me. It became something that was really cool, because that means that designing deck building, when I finally make a bunch of cards and there's a bunch of different things that you can choose from, it's going to be a whole lot more fun. Deciding exactly what you want to use and when, and understanding that in the game that sometimes that unoptimal cards are going to have to be used, even if you don't want to, is going to make it really interesting to put decks together. And I think that made combat really an interesting system for me, especially because there was never really a moment where it was like, okay, I play this big attack card and it's so much stronger than your defense card and you don't have a defense for it or anything like that, but rather it was sort of a slow chip game over time, but where everything felt fair for both the attacker and the defender. Anyway, I thought it was pretty cool, and I think I'm hoping to expand on it in the future, because it was actually a pretty big pro for me. Something that I didn't even talk about in previous videos that I ended up adding while I was designing the cards that only added to the combat system. One of my biggest things that I like about this card game was the sort of upgrade system. When I first conceived the upgrade system, it wasn't going to be anything important to the card game. A lot of times when you have card games with upgrades, upgrades sort of take control, right? Equipment sort of becomes a big thing because they're permanent things you can put on the field that make you better. And in some card games, that things like that have that sort of mechanic to them ends up overrunning the board. There's tons of them, a bunch of different abilities, or they're just really powerful. Or sometimes it kind of feels like, okay, my opponent's too built up. No matter what I put out, there's nothing I can do to stop them. And I didn't want that to be the case for this card game, but I ended up adding a little more to the upgrade system that I originally conceived. I gave it something called durability, and every upgrade card had a certain amount of durability, and when you use an upgrade card, it reduces durability. When it runs out of durability, it gets discarded, right? So that meant that no upgrade card, no matter how powerful, was going to stay on the board forever. And that really added something to the card game. That meant that I had a little more space in which I could work with the upgrade cards moving forward. And I made upgrade cards that can help you attack. The upgrade cards that can't attack on their own, as you would see in other card games. And it ended up being really cool to have those on the field. Sometimes you'd have a guaranteed attack coming your way, but you know it's not going to last forever. Every upgrade gets discarded eventually. And sometimes you had upgrades to simply help you in attacking, and you could use them to make any other attack more powerful. And it felt really cool to have a character with a signature weapon upgrade that ended up making the character, attack the character used, more powerful based on what they could do, right? It was pretty cool. I like the upgrade mechanic. One other mechanic that I really liked, and this also leads into the combat mechanic, which is why I say combat in general is my biggest thing that I liked about the card game. That was going to be the boosting mechanic. That one aspect of the card game, of the combat system, in which you can add more attack to a card or add more defense to a card. And that really depends on that really decides whether a card is better for attacking or defending. And so the boosting mechanic became so much cooler when I added boost effects to other cards in the game. Certain other cards had boosting on them that when during this phase where you could boost a card, you could use this boost ability, and it really made every combat scene a lot more engaging and more interactive than it had otherwise could have been if this was not the case. And there's a lot of space there to play around with card effects and stuff like that I'm really excited to do in the future, and it's something that really gets me excited about the future of the card game. You know what I always like to see when I'm talking about a card game, when I'm designing a card game, or even trying to find a new one to play, is that when I always have something more to say about it. When I'm ready to talk more about the card game than I'm really allotted to. I've taken a lot of time talking about this card game so far, and I'm really excited for the fact that I want to talk about it more. But there's no point in doing so. As I continue to playtest the game's going to change, and that means that a lot of things I'm saying right now may end up not being true next week or tomorrow, right? Depending on how much playtesting I can get done, how many ideas, and what pops in my head at the middle of the night, right? So the question is, how can I move forward with the game? How can I improve the things that I like and sort of fix the things that I don't? I think the important thing, of course, is the more playtesting. Ask anybody who's a playtester or a game designer in general, and they'll tell you that if you want to fix a card game, if you want to fix a game in general, you got to play it more. You got to find and do different things. You got to play around with the ideas that you created and see what sort of you can do to break your own game and what you can do to really make it more enjoyable afterwards, right? So that's what I'm going to end up doing in the future. But I still think that there's something to be said about thinking, not just doing. You can't always just play the game and hope that somehow playing the game is going to make the game better. You have to actively change it. And so in the future, I'd like to add more space to this universe, to this game. In the next video, I'm going to talk about probably the lore of the card game, because a lot of card games can be defined and changed based off the lore that I've given them, or rather that you've given them, you, the designer, right? So that's what I'm going to do in the future, and I think that's going to add a lot more ideas to my head. When I'm coming up with different ideas about how the universe works, it will give me more ideas about how the cards can work, because the cards in the universe should be hand in hand. And I hope you guys are ready and really excited to see that happening in next week's episode of Making My Own TCG. I hope to see you guys there.